expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of this station, its owners, staff, or management. The following program is sponsored by Rob Warner at Guild Mortgage, NMLS number 825102. Welcome to the Happy Hour with Rob Warner, an hour of stimulating conversation adding value to your financial future. Rob brings helpful insights into many aspects of the mortgage and real estate industry. Now, here's your host, Rob Warner.
Happy Monday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Happy Hour. I'm your host, Rob Warner with Guild Mortgage. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend, and I hope you have a happy Monday as well. Today, we're only going to have one guest today. As you well know, I usually have two guests on my show, but Bradley Meyer, who's going to be one of my guests, he had a family loss over the weekend. He wasn't able to attend. So today's show is going to be with Bill Angove, Vice President over at Asset Preservation Incorporated, or commonly known as API, and I'm sure he'll be able to give a lot of insight to fill this full show today. So anyway, here we go. Hey, Bill, how's it going today?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent.
Thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. It's good to have you on here. You know, I've always wanted to have this type of information given to my clients because I think it's just really helpful, especially in today's market. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I, as of January, will be with API for 20 years. I was a commercial broker with a company called Bishop Hawk. Started then in 1988, did that for 10 years, and got recruited by our current president, Javier Van de Stieg, to come in and help run our company in Northern California and grow it, which we've done quite a bit over the years, and it's been fantastic. I market to mostly Northern California right now, to CPAs, attorneys, commercial brokers, realtors, lenders like yourself, on the benefits of 1031. So when you have clients that are selling and buying investment property, you'll think of asset preservation to help your clients do that process.
Very well. So for the first question, the very easy question, what is a 1031 exchange?
Sure. This is Internal Revenue Code Section 1031. It allows an investor to sell an investment property anywhere in the United States and buy a new investment property anywhere in the United States. So this is part of the Internal Revenue Code. It's been around since 1921. And many people think that when they do an exchange that they have to find someone to swap properties. And that was the way it was until a famous court case in the late 70s, and then the code changes in 84, and then the regs came out in 1990. So simply put, it's simply a sale of an investment property followed by the purchase of a new investment property. And the benefit is your clients get to, and the listeners get to defer their taxes, both state and federal. And we'll probably get into that more detail as we go along.
I did not realize it had been around that many years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And not only can you exchange real property, you can exchange personal property like airplanes, gold coins, artwork. We did an exchange for a local client. He had a 1965 Ferrari worth about $700,000, and he had to buy exactly like kind, and we'll talk about like kind later. So he bought a DeLorean, another Ferrari Dino, and he wanted to buy a Chevy truck, which didn't qualify. We'll talk about that later. Too.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me some of the reasons to exchange, if you can.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of reasons, and of course, first and foremost is that it's a tax deferral tool. It doesn't limit. People call it tax-free exchange. It's not tax-free. Nothing with the IRS is tax-free unless you die, right? So it's a tax deferral. But the benefit is when the exchange, they get to defer paying those taxes, and they get to preserve their equity and build that equity into more investment properties. One of the benefits is you can sell one property and buy two. You can sell five and buy one, so consolidation is one of the benefits. Management relief. Some people are tired of the T's, as I like to say. They're tired of toilets, termites, trash, and tenants, and taxes, of course. So that's one of the benefits. They can also diversify into different types of properties. They can sell a rental house and buy an office building. Again, we'll talk about like for like as we go along. So if they're tired of the T's and they want to go to the commercial world and they want to buy a long-term triple net leased property anywhere in the United States, they can do so. And then, of course, they need to do it for estate planning. Many people think that, let's say mom and dad grew up and have their business located in the Bay Area. but they have a kid in Los Angeles and a kid in Sacramento and a kid in Chico, they may want to think about that their holdings are in the Bay Area. They want to sell those assets where the kids aren't located and buy investment properties where the kids are located, rental houses or whatever they may be. So when they do pass, those kids inherit those properties where they're located. Maybe they're helping manage those properties along the way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Pros and cons of selling versus exchanging.
Pros and cons. Well, there's a lot of pros and cons. Not as many cons, of course. The pros are a lot of the things that I just talked about: tax deferral, preservation of equity, management relief, etc. A con is that when you do an exchange in real estate, it's not really as far as cash. Can't go into cash as easy. So the downside is you're still buying real property. The downside is it still can go up in value and it still can go down in value. It's not easily liquid, was what I was trying to say.
Okay,
right?
So, and I didn't have that as a question, but just touch on it real quick. You can actually do an exchange that gets you part cash out, right? I mean,
yeah, there is. It's a partial exchange.
I actually did have that as a question.
I was going to say,
sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No problem. Sometimes people say they have a $500,000 property that's all equity. They have no debt. And they may have credit card debt or want to put a kid through college or buy a new car, so they can pull some money out if they so choose. We refer to that as boot. They'll pay tax on it, both state and federal. California has a withholding rule. So if they want to pull out $100,000 or $25,000 and only reinvest $450,000 or $400,000 into the new property they're buying, they can do that. So it's called a partial exchange.
So they're just paying tax on the boot.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the exchange equation.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's okay.
No problem.
Are there, let's go back into kind property. What is like kind property?
Sure. Many people feel, the first thing that people do is they go out and Google 1031, and they won't go to a site like ours. They'll go to some site that, who knows, made it up or whatever. But the misunderstanding in the exchange world is that if you sell a rental house, you have to buy another rental house exactly like for like, and that's not necessarily the case. It has nothing to do with the grade or quality of that property. It has to do whether it's held for investment, trade or business, or held for investment. So the people listening, that are the contractors or the dentists, the doctors out there, they could sell a rental house and buy a new building for their practice for being a doctor or a dentist. The contractors that have been leasing warehouse space for all these years, they could sell that and buy a 5,000 square foot building in Loomis or Rockland or Folsom or wherever it may be to locate their business there. So trade or business or held for investment anywhere in the United States.
I got stuck on this, so I'll just mention it to you because we moved up from Orange County, 14 years ago, and I was told by a person that did my taxes at the time that I couldn't come out of a rental property and buy land. Can you talk about that?
Sure. If it's held for trade or business or held for investment, land does qualify. Absolutely.
And this person was advising me because I guess the land wasn't producing income.
And income is not a requirement under like kind either, and that's a big misunderstanding. People will inherit property from their parents or grandparents or whatever it may be, whether it be a rental house, an office building, or whatever it may be. Take the case of land, up in Grass Valley or Shingle Springs or whatever it may be. Maybe it was used for grazing, maybe it wasn't. But you inherited it, call it a $100,000 value, you held on to it for 5 or 10 years. Now it's worth $1 million. Was it a good investment? Sounds like it to me. But having rental income is not a requirement for 1031. Writing off the depreciation is not a requirement. Writing off the mortgage interest is not a requirement. Held for trade or business or held for investment.
Oh, I know. If I could have redone that would have, because it was during the market, when properties were selling so fast. So it was like I actually. I lost out on it because
what some people do is they'll buy property that they eventually want to build on, either for their business or maybe a primary residence. They buy it and hold on to it, goes up in value, or they want to buy a property in a vacation area like Tahoe or Vail or Hawaii. So they can do that as long as it's held for investment. There is, and we can talk about the holding period in a little bit, unless you have that on there.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Well, not really the holding period, but there are time frames that have to be adhered to meet the requirements of an exchange. Can you go into that? Because that's something else that I know people get stuck on.
Yeah, and first things first, for those listeners that may be new to exchanges out there, if you're going to do an exchange, the first thing you should do is talk to your tax person. And also, please, if you're going to do it or even think about doing it, make sure the exchange is set up with us before close of escrow, because if they close escrow, it's going to be too late to do the exchange. So first things first is talk to your tax person, CPA or tax advisor. TurboTax is not necessarily going to give you good advice when it comes to real estate. Number two, engage a qualified intermediary, and we'll talk about what it takes to be a qualified intermediary in a few minutes. And then I don't know if we have time to finish the timelines, or should we go ahead and take a break now?
Well, we have a minute left, so please give out some of your contact info right now in the show. Please.
Okay. To learn more information about our company in the exchange business, you can go to apiexchange.com. So the three letters for our company and the word exchange.com. My contact information is very simple. My cell phone is 916-832-1031.
Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Happy Hour. I'm Rob Warner with Guild Mortgage, and we're joined by Bill Angove from API. And welcome back again, Bill. We were talking about time frames and I know people get stung on this a lot.
Yeah.
There's like an identification period and a total exchange period.
Exactly.
Talk about those, please.
So we left off is making sure that if you're going to do an exchange that you would set it up, and you don't necessarily have to do it. You can have your escrow officer or your realtor or whoever set up the exchange with us, and what we need is to get your basic information: name, address, telephone number, the title company you're working with, and the parameters of your transaction, the sales price, how long do you own the property. We do a really good job about qualifying our clients, making sure they need to do an exchange before they even set it up. The basic timeline is the exchange process begins when you close escrow, not when you go under contract, not when you receive an offer, but when you close escrow. And the first time that Rob was alluding to is the identification period. The regulations stipulate that you have 45 days from that closing to identify in writing, unambiguously, the potential property or properties that you're looking at buying. The total timeline that you have is 180 days to close on that replacement property. That's not to have it under contract. That's to close, meaning close escrow. You have the title to that property. Going back to the beginning of the process, and let's talk about the flow. Technically, what happens is when you do an exchange, you cannot have constructive or actual receipt of your proceeds. So going back to when I was talking about people call us after the fact, well, if they have the money in their bank account, that's actual receipt. If the money is sitting at their favorite title company, that's constructive receipt. So our documentation needs to be in place and signed by the taxpayer/exchanger prior to that closing taking place. The reason is the proceeds. So let's keep it simple. You're selling a property for $250,000. You have $250,000 outstanding loan. You may incur some closing costs, et cetera, commission to a realtor. Whatever's left, that money is wired to us as the qualified intermediary to be held during that 45 and 180-day timeline. And then when they close on the replacement property, we wire those proceeds back out. So the flow is set up the exchange, close of escrow happens, the proceeds get sent to us by the title company. We hold those proceeds with our company safely and securely. There is no regulation in my industry whatsoever. So you want to work with a company that is reputable, been around for a long time, provides security procedures in place for those funds to be wired out. There's been a lot of hacking going on by people outside that like your client's money more than you like your money. So we have things in place like requiring a notarized signature for those funds to go back out, authorization by the client, and just verification of exactly where those funds are going to go. There's been a case where a realtor's email account got hacked, and the hacker was able to get all the documentation with regards to the transaction, the wire numbers, the purchase and sale contract, prelim, everything. They had everything have to do with the transaction, and they sent a request to the exchange company saying, I want you to wire the funds to my client's account. Here's the wire number, which was false and fraudulent. And luckily, they were able to catch it. So those funds did not go because of the security procedures in place. So, going back to the timeline, the flow is the proceeds are sent to us. Now, as far as identification is concerned, technically what happens is your client has until midnight of the 45th day to identify. What we do, and most qualified intermediaries do, is we provide the client exchanger identification letter. They'll fill that out with the addresses of the properties they're considering buying, and they'll send that list to us before midnight of the 45th day of the exchange. One of the options is they can identify up to 3 properties. It doesn't matter the price or order. So you could identify a property in Maui, one in Vail, and one in Palm Desert. And we'll talk maybe about vacation homes a little bit and whether they qualify for exchanges. And so they'll put the physical address of that property down, and they'll sign that document. What they must do is they must sign the document and send it to us before midnight of the 45th day of the exchange. That list is changeable, but only during the 45-day period. So let's say on day 15 you send us A, B, and C, but you get out to day 25 and you don't like those properties anymore. Or in today's market, with the realtors will attest to this, is the inventory is very low, meaning there's not as many available options for them.
Yeah, that was going to be my question for you. What happens in that situation?
Well, the good news is that if they're inside of the 45 days, they can change their list. They would revoke their old list with us and submit a new A, B, and C. Here's where it gets more difficult. Let's say in the 45 days they identify A, B, and C. Now they get out to day 60 of their exchange, and A, B, and C are no longer available per the inventory problem. The issue is it's not our rules, but the IRS regulations stipulate that you can't just get your money back at day 60 because you can't buy those properties. What's known as the G6 restrictions state that you can't get your money back until you either use it towards the properties you've identified, or here's the downside, they have to wait until the 180-day period, which is roughly 6 months. They have to wait until that period expires before they can get their proceeds back. So we do a really good job, and our staff is fantastic at API in educating our clients on these facts.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I did know about the 45-day period, but I didn't know what can happen.
Yeah. As an example of that, let's say they identify A, B, and C. They close on A. Let's say go back to my example. They're selling for $500,000. They identify A, B, and C. Property A is $400,000, and they use all that money, or at least $400 of the $500 cash, so there's no debt. They use all that towards property A, and there's $100,000 left over. They say, Bill, I'm done. I only want to buy property A. Give me the $100,000 back. Well, per those regulations, they can only use that $100,000 towards property B or C, or they have to wait until the end of the 180 days.
There's no way around that.
There's no way around that.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. The second option for identification is the 200% rule. So going back to my example, you're selling for $500,000, keeping it simple, all cash, no debt. And let's say they want to identify more than 3 properties. So the 200% rule essentially states that if you identify 4 or more properties, all those properties you've identified together cannot exceed double what you're selling for. So if I identify 4 or 5 or 10 properties out in Granite Bay, I'm selling for 5 now, keep in mind. I identify 5 properties in Granite Bay. All 5 of them together cannot exceed $1 million.
Yeah, not going to happen in Granite Bay, but
yeah.
But how long's that rule been around? A while? That 200% rule?
The regulations have been around since 1990, 91.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Wow. Okay. This is good information.
Prior to that, we just had the 45 and 180 days. There weren't any limitations. You could identify the whole Orange County phone book if you wanted to.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, talk about what is exchange. What do I have here? I can't even read my own writing.
The exchange equation.
Equation.
Sure.
Equation.
Right. So people want to know, do I have to spend all of my money when I do an exchange? The answer is no. That's not an IRS regulation. However, if you hate the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board here in California, if you don't want to pay any taxes, the general idea is to do 2 things. Number 1, reinvest all of your cash. And number 2, take on a loan that's equal or greater to your old loan. So going back to my example, if I'm selling for $500,000, my loan balance is $250,000, and my equity therefore is $250,000. Forget closing costs and commissions. I want to use all of that $250,000 towards my new property, my cash, and I want to have a new loan that's $250,000 or greater. You'll hear people say, buy of equal or greater value when you do an exchange, and that's a pretty good way to remember it if this is a lot of information to take in at one period of time. But the goal is, for full deferral, reinvest all of your cash and take on equal or greater debt. If you don't have any debt in your old property, then that doesn't apply.
Okay, so that applies if you have debt. Very
Right.
good. Okay, how long does a property need to be held to be considered an investment property?
That's a question that we get multiple times a day on our 800 number that we have. It's 800-282-1031 if I can give the plug. The problem is there is no answer to that question. We look at two things. Time is one factor. If the IRS audits are going to look at how long have you held the property for, and number two, the factor is intent. Why did you buy the property? How long did you intend to hold it? And how long did you hold it for? So there is no easy answer to that. A lot of tax advisors, and just for those that are new listening, they're just like any type of industry. There's good and bad, whether it be a CPA or attorney or a realtor or lender, right? As you know, you want to find a CPA or tax advisor that understands real estate transactions, because some tax advisors say, "Well, hold the property for a year and a day," so you'll file 2 tax returns for the ownership of that asset. Some people feel that's long enough. Another more conservative answer would be at least 2 years. Hold the property for a minimum of 2 years, so you have 2 years of rental income, 2 years of depreciation, 2 years of mortgage interest write-off under your belt, showing the IRS that you weren't going to flip this property. Generally speaking, the flippers weren't doing exchanges as we were coming out of the recession because of that short holding period. The Franchise Tax Board, in my opinion, this is my opinion only, I don't give tax or legal advice, is probably the most aggressive agency in the United States auditing 1031 exchanges. And that short holding period, probably less than a year, is going to be one of your targets I think they would go after.
So pretty much a year is what?
Well,
is that what you, or do you not even give advice on that?
I don't give advice. I always say, talk to your tax person. Everybody has a different opinion on that. I mean, there has been a case out there where a family bought a property in exchange. They intended to hold it for 5 years until their daughter went to college. Facts and circumstances with regards to their primary residence, they lost that or had to move out, and so they moved into the property they bought in the exchange 6 months after they bought it. So they did an exchange, owned it 6 months, and then they moved into it. Later down the road, the IRS audited, but the taxpayer won because they didn't win under that 1 to 2 year holding period that we just talked about. They won under the fact that they had the intent to hold it for 5 years, and they were able to prove that to the tax courts, that they had intent to hold it for 5 years until their daughter went to college. They made every attempt to rent it out, put it on Craigslist or whatever, put the signs out, able to prove that they planned to rent the property out. Another case that just came out, a gentleman owned a property for 12 years and had his exchange disallowed, whereby he was acting as a dealer. And a dealer is a broad definition, but it's someone that basically holds the property with the intent to sell. Like I buy, build, and sell houses, right? You're like your big home builders around the town. They buy, they map, they engineer, they build. You don't see Elliott Homes, per se, selling off and exchanging out of each individual house they sell, because those are activities of a dealer, buy, build, sell. This gentleman bought the property with the intent to develop it. Here we are pre-recession. He's getting mapping done, engineering done, getting partners into the partnership, buying the property. Then the recession hits, market goes down, and he stops those activities of a dealer. Then he says, well, now I'm not a dealer anymore. I intend to hold this as an investment. Market starts going back up. He starts his activities of a dealer, getting more partnerships, re-engineering the maps, resubmitting to the city. Doesn't exchange, thinks he's okay, and the IRS says no. Even though you stop those activities, you're still a dealer under that definition, and therefore, 12 years, that's a long period of time, and had his exchange disallowed.
We have 1 minute before our halftime break. Give out your phone number again, just so people know who you are.
Sure. Cell phone 932-1031. My email address is bill@API Exchange, and the 800 number 800-282-1031.
Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the Happy Hour. I'm Rob Warner with Guild Mortgage. We're joined again by Bill Angove with API, that's Asset Preservation Incorporated. We were talking about 1031 exchanges. Bill, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the different types of exchanges?
Right. What we've been talking about so far is referred to a delayed exchange. Some people call it a Starker exchange. That's the court case that I was talking about that happened late 70s, early 80s. So delayed, you're going to hear it called forward exchange. And in simple terms, it's simply a sale followed by a purchase. there is such a type of exchange called a simultaneous exchange, where if you and I have a property, we could swap. Well, that's one way. That's actually very different. So pre the court cases, let's call this early 70s, 60s, etc. You and I each have properties that are equal in value. We can do a two-party trade or two-party swap. A simultaneous exchange is basically you're selling the same day and buying the same day of your replacement property. Some people are under the understanding that has to happen. That's a requirement of exchanges, and that's not the case. So a simultaneous exchange. Again, we talked about delayed exchange. And another one that's very popular right now is called a reverse exchange, where it allows a taxpayer to, if you will, buy their replacement property first and sell second. For the agents listening in the room or on the radio here, if your clients are those angel clients, as I like to say, where they have cash or the ability, or a lender like yourself, to buy the replacement property first. So let's say, we're coming out of the recession and there's a lot of foreclosures going on, and this bank owns this property that's an office building, say up in Roseville, and the person, the exchanger, says, well, I can get this property for $75 a square foot. Call it a two-story office building. But to build the building, it's $150 a square foot. So that's a fantastic steal of a property. So that happens in a reverse exchange, is that the exchanger will contact us, engage our company to act as the qualified intermediary from the transaction. We will form an LLC, limited liability company. That entity, with the taxpayer's money, will then close on that office building on the taxpayer's behalf. We call that parking title. Under the regulations that came out in the year 2000, then the taxpayer has 180 days in reverse, if you will, to sell their old property and exchange into the one that we're holding for them. So it's a great transaction for the people that have the ability to buy first. Because what does it take out of the picture? The identification period, right?
Oh, that's the huge part, right? Don't get me wrong, isn't it? And especially when properties are selling so quick.
Especially in the commercial front, a lot of investors that own buildings now say, I'm a little concerned about finding a suitable replacement property in that 45 days. And so, the commercial broker may say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if I can show you a way, Dale Carnegie, if I can show you a way that you can find and buy that replacement property and then have 180 days to sell your old property, would you be interested? And that will usually get them off their duff, so to speak, on listing the property with the broker, because listed at the right price, the relinquished property should sell, depending on the cap rate, et cetera. The only thing they have to do is, once we park title or take title of that new property, they have 45 days to identify what it is they're going to sell. Well, most people already know what they're going to sell, right?
I would think so.
What becomes the issue here is we're the taxpayer, our LLC is the taxpayer buying that property on their behalf. So if you're the lender and the taxpayer says, I'm buying this property for $1 million, I'm going to put $200,000 down, Rob, and I want your company to loan me the other $800,000, but it's really not going to be to me. It's going to be to this LLC. And you go, well, who's going to be my guarantor of the loan? And the qualified intermediary says, not us. So it's got to be the type of client that you've done a lot of business with, or your institution has done a lot of business with, or they have other assets that would guarantee that loan. And your underwriting people will have to say, okay, we've done all these loans with these people, or they have 5 other office buildings, and they'll pledge those as the loan for the LLC to take title of that property. That works, but a lot of times they'll pay cash. They'll borrow it from other sources, their 401k or whatever. They'll borrow that money, buy that property, and then when they sell their old property, they replace the money they borrowed back to themselves, and maybe a lot of times what they do is they'll call you and then refinance that property to pull cash out.
Okay, I got to get this clear in my head. Sorry about this. But
it can be complicated. Talk to your qualified intermediary.
So the property is held in an LLC, so in other words, the LLC has to borrow the person can't be a personal guarantee. A loan cannot be made to that individual.
You can do a side letter of guarantee, but not
the title has to be. The loan has to be made to the LLC.
The 1425 River Park LLC, hypothetically, is our
and the
buyer.
Same. Let's just not to belabor this, but this is important. If let's say you're not buying an office building, you're selling a house, but you're afraid, you're not going to be able to, with how quick the inventory is moving right now. if you're buying another single family, it's still going to be held in an LLC, right? So so you almost have to have cash.
Well, primary residence doesn't work, of course.
No, not primary. I'm saying you have
Yeah.
a rental home. I'm sorry, a rental house maybe, or a duplex or a fourplex, and you're going to parlay it into another. So the intermediary is going to hold title in an LLC. Right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so you almost need cash to do a reverse exchange,
And
right?
a lot of times this does not work for your $250,000 or $300,000 type of transaction, because the client has to look at how much capital, if they sold, how much taxes would they pay. If they're only going to owe $5,000 or $10,000, a reverse exchange does not pencil for them, because the cost is significantly more expensive. And I'll just go off on this tangent for a minute. Most qualified intermediary fees, let's call it, run $800 to $1,100. Some are $750. We charge $700 when they sell their relinquished property, and $300 when they buy the replacement property. I can tell you, reverse exchanges probably run about 8 to 10 times that.
Oh,
significantly more
okay.
expensive.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got a pencil for the clientele.
Bigger
That's
properties,
why I said that
okay.
bigger properties where they've, if they're going to put out $8,000 to $10,000, they've got a $70,000 or a $200,000 or $250,000 tax liability hanging over their head. So it has to pencil for them.
Okay. Oh, okay. We talked about partial exchanges already, right?
Yeah, it had a different format of a reverse exchange, which might be helpful for the people listening too.
Oh, okay.
So let's say that it's a client of yours, you want to loan them the money, but that format doesn't work for your underwriting people. But they own their old properties free and clear. So the other way to do it is, instead of us taking title to their new property, we take title to their old property. Okay? So you deed their old property over to us. What does that free them up to do? Buy their new property with you, the lender. They put that certain amount of money, which is equal to their equity down from their old properties to the down payment over here. You write them a regular, straightforward, non-owner occupied investment property loan. Boom. Well, what still has to happen? Well, we're on title to their old property. So they have 180 days to sell the old property that we're holding title to them for.
Okay. What is that type of exchange called?
That is also a reverse exchange.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
We're
That is really good to know, by the way.
And here's keep it simple, is you can't own both properties at the same time. Well, people go out and they'll say, well, I bought this new property. I want to exchange from this office building to this new property I just bought. The problem is you cannot exchange into something you already own. That's the important thing for them to understand.
Okay.
So if they have us buy it through the LLC, then they can exchange into the property that we're holding for them. So we're either holding the property for the property they're going to sell, or we're going to hold title to the property they're going to or sell, and or the property they're going to hold to the top property they're going to buy. I'm twisting my own words now.
No, I have a client. I don't want to belabor this on the show right now. They own like $1 million property in like Georgetown. It's like a ranch. It's like a really beautiful property, but it's a lot of upkeep for them right now, and they're deliberating what they want to sell. But that kind of property is unique. That could take a while.
Well,
I mean?
Funny you mentioned farm and ranch exchanges, because that's another option too, where down in Napa you have a lot of vineyards. All over California there's large ranch properties. We've done a number of exchanges on pistachios and almonds coming out of the recession, because a lot of corporations are coming in and buying mom and pop out. Dairies are a big type of exchange, where you may have a primary residence that is attributable to the acre, but they've got 100 acres of pistachios, hypothetically. Well, they can do an exchange for the property that's held for trade or business or held for investment, meaning the vineyard or the crop or whatever that may be that's growing on that property. That's their exchange. But they can also carve out the primary residence under Section Code 121. And what that code says is, if you've owned and lived in the home any 2 years out of a 5-year period, you're entitled to, if you're single, $250,000 of gain tax-free. If you're married filing jointly, you get up to $500,000. So you can take advantage of both parts of the tax code, Section Code 121 or Section Code 1031.
Okay. Are those same time frames of the 45-day identification still applies, right?
Not on the primary residence. You can do whatever you want.
No, not on that, but on the
vineyard
or
ranch. You got it.
Okay. So
you bet.
Okay. Wow. All right. Because I was recommending a reverse exchange to these folks. I said, hey, you got the money, go buy a two development, new construction homes or something.
Right.
That are going to be done within that 6-month period. But
well, they still could do a reverse exchange. Is their primary residence on a portion of the property?
No.
So that would still work.
It's a secondary residence. We're going to get into that in a minute, though, huh? We got a lot. Okay, somebody owns a duplex or a fourplex, lives in one of the units. I know you kind of covered this already. We have a couple minutes, so I don't know, but that's the same thing that we're talking about, like with the vineyard, correct?
Yeah, we refer to it as a split treatment exchange. And matter of fact, I just set one up this last week where a gentleman lives in half, and the other half has been a rental for a number of years. So you can exchange into another duplex or fourplex where you can live in one of the units and live in the other 2 or 3. But the issue is the money coming out of the side that's a rental can only be used towards the portion of the property that's going to be rental again. So $1031 for 1031 property, primary residence dollars, he can do whatever he wants. He can, if he's lived there for 2 out of 5 years and he's got up to $250,000 or $500,000 a gain, he use that money towards the one unit he's going to live in. So that does work.
All right. I know we have a minute till the break, so your information again. I like to get your information out there
Sure.
to folks.
The website has a ton of information. We have over 200 topics under our Exchange library area. So people can go in there and calculate their capital gain, but the website is apiexchange.com. My email is simply bill@apiexchange.com. Our 800 number is 800-282-1031.
We'll be right back, folks. Don't leave. Welcome back to the Happy Hour. I'm Rob Warner with Guild Mortgage. We're joined again by Bill Angove with Asset Preservation Incorporated, API. Bill, what were we talking about? We were talking about fourplexes, duplexes. You know, one of my things I talk about on my show is for young couples, you know, that instead of maybe buying a house for their first house, since they've been renting an apartment, buy like 2 units or 4 units and live in one of them and rent the others out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've started your wealth management, right? I mean, you've started your little portfolio of property.
Right, absolutely.
So kind of parlay off of that for me. Somebody buys that and they live in it, well, a couple years, 2, 3, 4 years, right?
Right. So that's exactly what we left off on is they can use 2 parts of the tax code, whereas they have section code 121, which is the half they live in. And it doesn't have to be exactly equal, and I want to make sure that's clear. They may have 50, they may have a 25-75 split. That still works under both parts of the tax code. It doesn't have to be 50-50 for them to exchange on one portion and take the primary residence exclusion on the other. So, yeah, live there for a couple of years and build up their equity. I mean, that's the benefit of owning investment real estate is you're building equity through appreciation. You're building equity through cash flow from the tenant. You're building equity through them basically paying your mortgage down. I mean, if you have one mortgage on the property and the tenant's paying you close to or near fair market rent, you're using that towards your mortgage in a way that tenant is buying that property for you in a way, right? Just like a rental.
So they can exchange, they can use the money from their primary side to buy, well, then they could either buy another investment property and this time use the other money toward for a house for themselves, right?
Absolutely, yeah. They can just go off and buy a larger house just for their primary residence from that half of the transaction and go buy a new property. And that's why I always tell them to talk to people like you is if they're going to go buy a rental house, in whatever city, in whatever state, look at how much money they need to put down in order to make this property cash flow. Look at the potential rents, go on Craigslist, wherever you may be, figure out what your expenses are going to be, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, utilities, etc., and then figure out how much money they need to put down. If they want a 7% cash on cash, they know they may need to put 35% down or 40, or back when we were in the recession, sometimes I had heard people had to put 50% down. Now, this pre-recession, in 2005, they had to put 50% down to get a positive cash flow on a property because they are appreciating so fast and rents were not keeping up with that appreciation. But you're the expert.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there you go. Talk to me about some of the most common mistakes made on exchanges. I think you've touched on some already.
Yeah. The first and biggest mistake is people not talking to their tax person. Because during the recession, I talked to people out of needing to do an exchange because, their basis was X and their value was Y and they're about the same, and there was no gain really there. Now if they had inherited the property a number of years or they owned it for 20 years, they still made to do an exchange. We had clients that were doing non-equity exchanges because their basis was so low because they exchanged into that property, and they've done 3 exchanges, so their basis was so low. They still needed to, even though they didn't have any cash equity in the transaction. So setting up the exchange is second. Make sure it's done before close of escrow. A lot of people think that just because they write an offer, they've identified, and that's not necessarily the case. There is a way to write an offer and identify at the same time, but they need to identify within that 45 days. And the biggest thing that they forget or are not educated by other qualified intermediaries is there's no change in your list after the 45-day identification period.
We can talk about that after the show
Yeah.
because yours truly ran out of properties one time on
Right.
identifying it.
Another thing is the regulations stipulate that you have 180 days of the day your tax return is due to complete your exchange. Okay, well, that doesn't really matter until you get to October 17th of most tax years, because 180 days is April 15th. So it says you have 180 days of the day your tax return is due to complete your exchange. Well, what if you close December 1st or December 31st? That's going to shorten your 180-day period. So that's a problem. But the nice savior in that is that if you need to go beyond April 15th to complete your exchange, you just need to file an extension on your tax return. That gives you the full 180 days from December 15th, hypothetically.
All right, that's huge. That's good to know. Let's talk about vacation homes. We mentioned it briefly at the start. Can a vacation home qualify for an exchange?
One of my favorite answers when I give presentations to realtors or otherwise is it depends.
Oh, no, I don't know about that answer.
And I'll back up. From my days when I started in the exchange business back in 1998, I also get to call on the realtors up in North and South Lake Tahoe and Truckee, et cetera. And if you ask a lot of the agents up there back then, does a second home qualify for an exchange, they would say yes. Well, let's clarify what a second home is. That's strictly personal use, right? No rental income, no treating it as investment property on your tax return, et cetera. And they say yes because you bought this lakefront for X and you loaned it for a number of years and now it's worth $25 million or whatever the lakefronts run for up there. It depends on the property. That was a good investment, and they stuck with that for many years until a court case came out in the last 10 years, the Moore case, where they did an exchange on a home that was strictly a second home. Nope. No rental income, nothing. They did exchange into another second home, and the IRS audited. And then they argued back, and they argued back and forth, and they took it to the tax courts, and they finally, the taxpayer, lost because it wasn't held for trade or business or held for investment under what the 1031 code says. So then the IRS issued what we call a revenue procedure back in 2008. And they said, okay, if you want us to support your exchange of this vacation second home, for the 2 years preceding the exchange, personal use cannot be any more than 2 weeks. And you must rent it out for at least 2 weeks of those, each year of those 2 years. Then you do the exchange into the new property. Same rules apply. Personal use cannot be more than 2 weeks. You're allowed 10 maintenance days with that. Or it also, the same rule says 10% of its annual rental can be used for personal, but you need to rent it out for at least 2 weeks or more during each of those 2 years after that. So personal use 2 years before, personal use after, very minimal. Rent it out as much as you can to help support that's being held for investment.
Got it. Okay. Refinancing. Since I'm a lender, I need to know this. What's the best time to refinance, before or after an exchange?
Great question. We get that quite often. The general guidelines that we get from the CPAs and tax advisors out there is if someone does a refinance right before they do the sale of the property. In other words, you've done the paperwork for their refinance to pull cash out. Under audit, the IRS is going to treat that, and franchise tax board if they audit, they're going to treat that refinance money as boot because you did A, refinance to pull the cash out to not pay taxes on it before anticipating selling and doing exchange into replacement property. So what you'll hear more often than not is if you've got $1 million property that's owned free and clear, and you want some cash out, there's two options. Number one, you pull that cash out at the closing. We refer to that as boot. Mm-hmm. Talked about that before earlier, and that's fine, but they'll pay taxes on it. Or instead, do the exchange into the replacement property. Don't have any refinance paperwork done at that point in time. Let the deal sizzle, if you will, a little bit. Call it 3-6 months or whatever the timing is that most tax advisors would say. And then they would say, then do the refinance after the exchange to pull the cash out.
Okay, that way it's not boot. You've already completed your exchange.
Right.
Got it. Great. Choosing a qualified intermediary. How important is this?
It's very important. For those listening in the audience, we are an unregulated industry. And at any given time, any QI could be holding $600 million to $1 billion of people's money. And so if you're working with a qualified intermediary, you don't necessarily want to go with the blue light special, as I call it, because anybody can do what we do. So we have those qualified intermediaries that are independent companies. They're not owned by a parent company. Therefore, they'll say that we're bonded and we carry insurance, and that's great. And there are very many good ones out there, and I have nothing bad to say about them. And then you have your title company-owned qualified intermediaries. So whether it be First American, Old Republic, Stewart Title, Placer Title, all those companies have typically their qualified intermediary arm. What you get out of that is the parent company saying whatever happens to the money that's being held by that qualified intermediary, it's protected, it's guaranteed. Whatever they want to say, they all say something different. They all say we're bonded for $10 million or $22 million, $100 million, et cetera. You want to be ensured that those funds are being placed, number one, not in grandma's bank account or underneath a mattress. It's going to some large institution like a Wells Fargo, a Citibank, or whoever it may be.
Okay, very important, because I know there's been some people that have flown the coop, you might say, with some people, invested the money somewhere else and lost the investment, and suddenly your exchange is no longer valid.
So questions to ask: how long have you been in business? What kind of security procedures do you have in place? Those types of questions are really important.
Very good. We've got a couple minutes left. I know I've been asking you to give this out over and over again, but I think it's important, folks. You got to call Bill because he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
Once again, your phone number.
Yep. 800-282-1031. If people can't get me on my cell phone, there's operators standing by if you want my office. I'm just kidding for those listening from my office. 800-282-1031. My cell phone, 916-832-1031.
Give Bill a call. I've been in lending for 32 years, and I have seen more people screw up these exchanges, and I have not screwed one up myself, but been caught in the market where the properties moved too quick and the properties I identified were gone already. Mm-hmm. And that 45-day identification period is huge, right?
Yeah, and they can be out there making offers and have the replacement property under contract before they even close their old property. They probably just make their offers contingent upon their old property selling. If you can get a seller to cooperate in this marketplace, that's kind of tough.
Oh, thanks for sharing that tidbit, because I didn't, there's so much to learn. Call Bill, because you need somebody that can guide you through this and do the right thing for you. Anyway, any other thoughts real quick? We have 1 minute left. Anything else? You got 1 minute.
1 minute. I don't know, what's some of the topics that we checked off there?
Converting a rental to a resident.
Yeah.
I guess we're out of time anyway.
We'll have to do it again another time.
All right. Thanks for being with me, Bill. It's been great having you on the show. Everybody, thanks for listening. We look forward to having you back listening to us next Monday. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Guild Mortgage Company is an equal housing lender. NMLS 3274. Licensed by the Department of Business Oversight under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Rob Warner. NMLS 825102. All loans subject to underwriter approval. Terms and conditions may apply. Subject to change without notice.